Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
Welcome back, everybody. I'll tell you, there's one thing I didn't do today, and that was I did not log on to see where my retirement is at. I'm just not doing it. I'm just not doing it. Going to let it go. Can't control what you can't control. We don't do politics on this program. I'm just going to get that out of the way before we begin. But we do take a look at the law and what encompasses that. What's law got to do with it is the name of our program with Carol Sigmond. She's our professional of the year. She's a legal professional that is a partner, actually, with Greenspoon, Marder, LLP, New York City. And among other things, specializes in real estate litigation, also construction. And we're going to take a look at the legal aspects of current situations that we're all aware of. Welcome back, Carol. How are you doing today?
Well, thank you, Steve. How are you?
Don't log on. Just don't do it.
I have to say, I agree with you. I'm not looking. It's just easier not to look.
Yeah, it's been weeks. Yeah, and I'm good with that. Just move that over to the side. So Lots of things going on, lots of worldwide ramifications connected to things that are going on. But there's also a legal aspect that many are not talking about. So we're going to do it today. Where do we begin?
Well, okay, let's start with the sort of like the 30,000 foot. By my count, there are about 160 lawsuits that have been filed in the federal courts against various executive orders by the president. We're going to really focus on only one, which was filed by a group of lawyers from Columbia University who call themselves the New Civil Liberties Alliance or Union or something like that. Mm-hmm. They're out of Columbia law. And the issue they're looking at is the president's authority under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. So that is the statute under which all of the tariffs are being initiated. And they are challenging it, frankly, on behalf of a Florida-based paper company called Emily Lay Paper, Inc., doing business as Simplified. And they are challenging the legal basis for the tariffs on China. So I thought it would be a really good idea to spend a couple minutes looking at the history of war powers and emergency economic authority of presidents, and then look at the present situation so that we all understand.
I think that would be fantastic. And I believe that many of us just take it for granted or just assume if something is done at an executive level, well, yeah, of course, it's been vetted. It's okay. Maybe not.
Maybe not. So there has been, we won't go back any further than the First World War, but there was a law called the Trading with the Enemies Act for 1917. And that law essentially allowed the president, under certain circumstances, to declare a national emergency and take certain economic steps. That is the statute under which I think it was President Roosevelt stopped allowing the sale of certain products to Japan in the run-up to the Second World War, when we cut off steel and oil imports. It is also the basis on which, and it was a somewhat earlier iteration of it, we won't go into too many details, just it kind of evolved over time. It's also the statute that President Truman used to seize the steel mills to prevent the steel strike during the Korean War. Which the courts blocked. If you'll recall, Truman seized the mills, stopped the strike, ordered the labor unions to continue working. They challenged it in court. The court said no, this exceeded the president's authority under the Trading with the Enemies Act, and he had to find another way to keep steel moving for the Korean War. But so let's just understand the notion that the courts have authority over the president's exercise of his authority on war powers where Congress has acted, not in dispute. It's real. In 1977, Congress essentially repealed the Trading with the Enemies Act from 1917, voided the then still standing 4 presidential orders that were then in place. One of them had to do with the banking crisis, and there was another one, I think, having to do with Iran. But they were, all 4 of those standing orders were voided, blocked. And a new set of standards came in under what's called the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. And under this act, the President of the United States does have certain powers if he declares a certain type of national emergency. The threat has to be external from a foreign power. It has to be a threat to the national security, foreign policy, or economy of the United States. And it allows the president to block certain transactions and freeze assets. And if you think about one use that was made of this, was assets for Iran were frozen. Certain assets for Russia were frozen when they invaded Ukraine. So this is the type of circumstance under which it's been used and not seriously challenged. There have been challenges every time the president takes a step like this. It normally is challenged, but there hasn't been a lot of controversy over it. And a good deal of the IEEPA was an effort to curtail presidential powers in this area. So that's kind of the background in which we are finding ourselves. President Trump's executive order declaring the national emergency focuses on fentanyl. And he maintains that fentanyl is being used in the United States to undermine the welfare of the American people. Okay. First of all, factually, that has to be supported. Under the Administrative Procedure Act, any presidential executive order can be challenged. One of the bases of the challenge would be, does the executive order factually stand up to the test? So the executive order was focused on Mexico, China, and Canada. There is virtually no fentanyl trade from Canada into the United States. So the notion that fentanyl would justify tariffs on Canada is factually going to be difficult for the president to defend. That is not part of the Emily Lee paper challenge, but that is an issue that people need to be aware of.
I'll bet you, Carol, that many people don't realize that that's why that tariff was enacted. They're thinking more trade. And then there's others that might be aware that say, oh, just using that as an excuse. Where's the facts? How do you back that up? With any legal action, don't you need to, quote unquote, show cause?
You do. And in this lawsuit that's been filed in Florida, there is an APA claim and Administrative Procedure Act claim, and they want the president and the executive to show how fentanyl is a threat to national security, and they want them to tie China to it. Now, I was just going to say, China manufactures the components of fentanyl. They are common components. They are used in other things other than fentanyl. They are shipped into Mexico, where it is manufactured or processed into fentanyl and then smuggled into the United States. So China has the China aspect of it could be a little questionable, but let's go one step further. Is the fentanyl crisis a basis to invoke the IEEPA? It is not a crisis that's mentioned in the War Powers Act. It's not something that was declared. A threat to the national health from an import is not something that has been identified, and it's not the blocking or seizure of an asset. It's a tariff. It's a tax. And that's the second part of what we really need to understand. Tariffs are taxes. And it's not, it's not like taking the Iranian oil money that we seized after the issues in Iran. It's not like taking Russian assets like we seized after Ukraine. It's not like blocking them from the SWIFT system as we did after Ukraine. This is something quite different. This is the imposition of a tax. Now, tax authority rests in the first instance in the House of Representatives. The Constitution provides that all tax bills must initiate in Congress, and they must initiate in the House. The Senate can't even initiate a tax bill. They can only opine on when the House has started. So that is a second element in the lawsuit by Emily Lee Paper. She's saying the tariffs are really a tax, and they didn't come out of Congress, and the president doesn't have unilateral tax authority. And let's be very clear, tariffs are not a remedy granted to the president under the IEEPA. So assume for purposes of discussion, the declaration of emergency was sufficient to invoke the IEEPA. Tariffs are not a remedy the president has. So that gives rise to the third part of the claim that has been brought by Emily Lee Paper, which is the president has exceeded his executive authority. He's usurped the authority of Congress. He doesn't have a factual basis under the Administrative Procedure Act, and now he has not followed the terms of the statute. He has attempted to impose a tax or a tariff when that's not what one of the remedies is. It's blocking and seizure of assets. Then the last, so these are sort of the basic claims, and these are the basic legal disputes. You can take the same disputes and someone can bring the same case on Canada. You can bring the same case on Mexico, because the Mexicans would say, and those that would be advocating in favor of no tariffs with Mexico, they would say Mexico is already, blocking the fentanyl from coming into the country. That's why they deploy their military at the border. And that's why they're doing what they're doing. So it's there could be some problems here from a legal point of view for the president. Then ask yourself, he hasn't articulated any basis other than economic for the rest of the tariffs, be it India or the European Union or Brazil or pick a country. There's no basis articulated except economic. Economic sanctions or economic authority in the form of a tax is not one of the bases for which not one of the remedies under the IEEPA.
Do you feel that there's been a lack of detail in all of these being enacted? And it almost sounds, and again, I'm looking face value, like you said, 30,000 feet over, just flying over. Does it seem that every country is a different situation, but this is just blanket, just tariffs, just throw it on there? Everyone is unique in what we're talking about here. What's going on between the United States and Brazil, vastly different between the United States and, say, China.
Yes, that is part of the problem. And that's not in this lawsuit, but I don't know at which point other importers will act. But there are, think about the automobile unions. They're losing jobs. Think about the state of Michigan. They've got, pretty heavy duty issues. Because they're going to have a lot of unemployed people. The car manufacturers are in trouble because of this. There are potential plaintiffs out there for Canada and Mexico and the other countries. I think right now they're choosing to try to negotiate, and the event with the dollar yesterday, with the dumping of the U.S. debt and the fear that the dollar will lose its premier position in the world, which is actually part of our soft power that we project to try to maintain peace in this world. Our soft power in that area was badly shaken yesterday, and the Secretary of the Treasury was very disturbed by it, which is why we have the 90-day pause. So it's hard to say what will happen next and whether all of those other tariffs will come back. And if they do, will there be challenges? It seems to me that this challenge to China that has been brought I think it's in the Northern District of Florida, which is where the plaintiff is based, which is basically a constitutional challenge. It says the president exceeded his statutory authority. He's usurped the authority of Congress to impose a tax. He hasn't followed the APA because he doesn't have a factual basis for his executive orders. These things are going to have to be tested in court. And that he's going to have to, the Justice Department will have to defend all of this. Now, the suit was only filed on April 3rd. It's in Pensacola, Florida. Presumably the plaintiffs, they're seeking a TRO. At some point, the judge will hold a hearing and they will file a motion for a preliminary injunction. And then the White House will have to come forward with evidence to support it.
Do you think this 90-day pause will buy time for the plaintiff for this all to get moving, or highly unlikely before 90 days are up, this will get resolved or examined?
In the case of this particular case, because it's focused on China and the Chinese tariffs are still in place, I would say it's likely that this case goes forward.
Okay.
Does the president... The problem we have is that the president is trying to use the executive authority in the IEEPA to bring manufacturing back to the United States. It's probably not a proper use of the IEEPA. So it's heavily challengeable. So that's going to be one problem. The second problem is going to be, are other importers other than Emily Lee Paper gonna fight back? Probably inevitably they have to. The 90 days gives them time to regroup. Does it give the White House time to rethink its position? I would hope so. Does it give the Justice Department time to rethink its position? I would hope so. I mean, I think it's extremely important, as I've said before to you, that we hold our leaders accountable for following the law. This is not about politics. This is about obeying the law. This is about, does the president have the unilateral authority to impose what amounts to a tax increase on the American people? Not entirely clear.
Am I hearing it clear for all of us that Canada, Mexico, those actions against those countries was fentanyl based? The
Yes.
rest of the tariffs are economic.
That's how it appears. And there doesn't seem to be even an attempt at an invocation of the IEEPA in those cases. It's strictly economic. And that is not a basis to invoke the war powers. This requires a real, existential threat.
Would it be reasonable to think a vote takes place, or is that the process where, the president has a position and then Congress votes on something like this? How would this even get enacted?
Well,
legally, that is.
There are two ways this could go. An IEEPA declaration can be challenged in Congress, and Congress can vote it down. I mean, that they have the right to do that. The Senate has tried to block that in the budget extension that they passed, that some people were so critical of Senator Schumer for signing on to, although I'm not, because he kept the courts open, and I think we need the courts open. It's a different issue. But there are there are Republicans in the House and the Senate that are beginning to have issues. There was a failed vote already in the Senate. It only failed by 1 or 2 votes. Don't know how this is going to play out, but Congress can void these IEEPA orders. They're not they're stumbling toward that possibility. I think it's more likely that the first action is going to come out of this court in Florida. And it's going to take time for this case to develop, but I think it's important for everyone to understand the case exists. There is a challenge to the president's exercise of authority, and there are bona fide arguments that he has exceeded his presidential authority.
Would you think it would have been prudent if he looked to do tariffs on one particular country and said, the rest are coming, so we better start working on this now, and use that one country as an example, as opposed to a blanket number of tariffs on multiple countries?
Funny you should say that. I've kind of jokingly said in my own mind that there probably is not a lot of sympathy for China because they've manipulated their currency. They've done a lot of trade things. Forget about the fentanyl side, but they've done a lot of things in international trade that are pretty unattractive. On the other hand, Mexico and Canada have been good trading partners, and we've done deals with them. One of the things that sort of trade experts, and now we're talking on the economic policy side, not so much the legal side, but I'll articulate the position so that at least it's out there. Trade experts believe in general that multilateral agreements in the trade area are more effective than bilateral agreements because there are fewer agreements to try to deal with and fewer to negotiate and fewer to manage. So what you're suggesting is, should we go back to more bilateral trade and less multilateral trade? That in this day and age is complicated. Mm-hmm. And I'll throw this complication at you that is under the rubric of the law. Whenever you're dealing in international trade issues, there is a thing called dual use. And dual use is a term used to describe technology that has both civilian and military application. One of the advantages of multilateral agreements is that we can blanket handle certain dual use issues. For example, within NATO and CETO and certain countries, we have very liberal dual use arrangements because of our NATO engagement. One of the reasons that Ukraine wants to be in NATO is it wants access to those dual use technologies. They want that status. One of the reasons that Sweden and Finland were more anxious to join more recently is, again, not only the Article 5, but also the dual use helps their economies. Then there's another class of countries where some of this technology can go because they're friendly, but maybe not that close. And then there are countries that we basically don't let any of this go to, like North Korea or Cuba. So maybe not so much Cuba anymore, North Korea. But so we have those kind of policies that make these multilateral trade deals easier, simpler, better for American business. It's easier for them to operate. And to just rewind the clock to a little bit of history, if you recall, we had a pretty good economy under Clinton. One of the reasons we did is that the Clinton administration did a systematic review of dual use, reclassified some countries, and opened up a lot of markets for certain products. This is going to complicate things because every time you get into a bilateral deal, now there's a new set of dual use issues that may come up for certain exporters. So it gets complicated. In the way the world economy is now, we're probably better off with multilateral deals. But the same principle applies. Would it have been better to save the North American trade pact with Canada and Mexico and work within that confine rather than go to tariffs Similarly, would it be better to work with the EU as a group rather than go to tariffs? And that's your question, and it's probably a fair question.
I appreciate all your insight. I truly am going to be the smartest person in the room this weekend based on all of this. And I love the way you break it down to make it clear, number one. But number two, you're legally programmed in terms of the language you use. In talking about China, you said they've done some unattractive things. Kind of chuckled inside because that's a nice way of putting it. Yeah, a legal way of putting it. Fantastic having you on here. Best way for somebody to reach you, Carol, if they have a question, comment, maybe even share with us, how can they find you?
My email address, Carol, Carol.Sigmond, Sigmond @gmlaw.com. And I do answer my emails.
Appreciate it. Thank you so very much for being here today. And I've learned things, even though I watch all the media that weren't said, especially about the legal aspect of what's going on here. Truly appreciate it.
Thanks, Steve. Have a good day.
You too. We'll
Bye-bye.
be right back.
Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
Adopt US Kids presents Multiple Choice Parenting.
Your daughter just had her first breakup. Do you A, put yourself in her shoes?
How could he do this to you? And for Sheila, she has split ends.
B, console her?
Oh, sweetie, this is going to happen a lot. 4, maybe 5 more times before you get married.
C, take charge?
Got to get this all straightened out. Give a little talking to, man to man, mano a mano. Hey, Steve! It's now a good time? No? Okay, no problem. Bye.
Or D, help her find a new boyfriend?
I know a great place to meet boys. The internet. Nice, single boys. Never mind. How about some ice cream?
As a parent, there are no perfect answers. But you don't have to be perfect to be a perfect parent. Thousands of teens in foster care will love you just the same.
For more information on how you can adopt, visit adoptuskids.org. A public service announcement from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, Adopt U.S. Kids, and the Ad Council.